You're watching The Last Climb. Today I'm examining the arrogant Karen who paid $620,000 for the VIP Everest package thinking it could guarantee her survival. Money had fixed every problem she ever met, so she was sure it would secure her place on the top of the mountain. But the brutal way Everest answered will show you exactly how little a fortune is worth up there. It was May 23rd, 2022, and high on the southeast ridge of Everest, hours past the time her guide had begged her to turn around, Cheryl Vandervoort was still grinding upward toward a summit she was certain she had already paid for. Her name was Cheryl Vandervoort. She was 54 years old, and she had spent her whole adult life proving people wrong. She had built a company from nothing, sold it for a small fortune in her late 40s, came through an ugly divorce, and remade herself into exactly the woman she wanted to be, polished, certain, and entirely used to getting her way. Money was the tool she trusted most, because for 30 years money had worked. It had opened every door and fixed every problem and quietly made every inconvenience in her life disappear. Everest was simply the next thing she intended to acquire, the biggest and most expensive box left to check. She was fit and she was not stupid, but her real climbing experience was thin. A guided walk up Kilimanjaro and a trekking peak or two, the kind of resume a serious Everest operator should have turned away at the door, since the mountain normally asks for years of hard, high climbing first. A check the size of hers found the one outfit willing to say yes anyway, and she had never once stood anywhere her money could not follow her in. To the people who knew her, Everest made a strange kind of sense. The biggest, hardest, most expensive thing she could possibly point herself at. The final proof that the girl everyone had once written off had ended up on top of the world. It's insane that she really believed that paying enough money would keep her safe up there, because I have seen that exact belief send people to their doom multiple times at this point. The first sign of who Cheryl was showed up in her emails months before she ever reached Nepal. She wrote to the company the way a person writes to a hotel that should feel lucky to have her, asking what the very top package included, and then asking, pointedly, what came above that, because she did not want the climb everyone else bought. She wanted the one almost no one could afford. She wanted a private guide who answered to her, a dedicated Sherpa team, the best forecaster money could hire, a heated dome, proper food, and above all a number, one big number, that would prove she had bought the safest possible version of the deadliest mountain on Earth. She negotiated it like a merger, line by line, and when it finally settled at $620,000, she began to treat that figure itself as a kind of armor, as if the more she paid, the less the mountain would ever be allowed to touch her. She even asked, more than once and in writing, what the success rate was on the most expensive package, as if a high enough number on that one line would settle the question of her own survival for good. By the time she reached base camp, the people working the mountain already had her number. Cheryl was unfailingly polite in the way that is somehow worse than rude, the politeness of a woman who quietly assumes everyone around her is staff. On the first day, she asked to speak to whoever was actually in charge, and she asked again every time an answer was not the one she wanted. She mixed up the Sherpas' names and corrected them about their own mountain. She mentioned the figure she had paid in nearly every conversation, a kind of password she expected to unlock things, and when the weather or the schedule failed to bend to it, she started talking about value, about standards, about how none of this was what she had been promised. She was, to everyone who watched her operate, a very specific and very familiar kind of client, the sort who believes a receipt is a form of authority. None of it was loud and none of it was cartoonish. It was just the steady, grinding assumption that the rules and the risks were meant for other people, the ones who had not paid what she had paid. Treating some of the best climbers in the world like hotel staff never sat right with me. It is the kind of thing that will just end up backfiring on you. From base camp, the posts came almost daily, and every one of them was a small performance. Cheryl showed her followers the heated dome and the rug on its floor, the chef plating food flown in by helicopter, the espresso machine, the fast internet, the hot shower, all of it captioned as "roughing it" with a little wink. She let the price slip too, more or less, the way people hint at the things they most want you to ask about. She posted a long note about how hard she had worked for this and how many people had doubted her, and thousands of strangers she had never met told her she was an inspiration. The mountain in those pictures was always safely in the background, a beautiful backdrop for the most expensive trip of her life, and not once, in a single frame, did it look like a thing that could reach out and kill her. She tagged the altitude on every post, and the comments filled with strangers calling her brave, none of them able to see the slow gray exhaustion the camera was always kept carefully away from. Everest is the highest mountain on Earth, just over 29,000 feet of rock and ice on the border of Nepal and Tibet, and for a few weeks every spring the wind drops enough to let people try for the top. Most of what kills them lives in the last stretch of the climb, in the death zone above 26,000 feet, where the air holds about a third of the oxygen a body is built for, and every hour up there is quietly taking you apart. None of that has changed in the nearly 70 years people have been climbing it. What has changed is the industry that has grown up around the mountain. A tier of luxury where enough money buys heated domes, private chefs, personal forecasters, bottled oxygen, and a small army of Sherpas to carry, fix, cook, and climb. You can buy almost anything at the foot of Everest now. The one thing that has never been for sale is the mountain itself, and it has never once read an invoice. Above the South Col, the rules are exactly the same for everyone who has ever stood there, and the size of the check you wrote has nothing to do with whether you walk back down. You cannot buy your body more time at that altitude, no matter what you spend, and I keep hoping someone would get through to her before it was too late! The brochure she had fallen in love with did not help her one bit. It promised a world-class, fully supported, expertly guided summit experience, all of it written in the glossy language built to make a brutally hard thing sound completely handled. It talked about high success rates and seasoned Western guides and the finest logistics in the Himalaya, and nowhere in those beautiful pages did it say the one plain thing that actually mattered, that no operator alive can promise you the top, and not one of them can promise you will ever come back down. Cheryl read the words fully supported, and somewhere in her head they quietly rearranged themselves into the word guaranteed. And once that happened, there was no talking her out of it. She quoted that brochure back to the guides more than once when they urged caution, as if the marketing copy were a contract the mountain had also agreed to sign. What the $620,000 actually bought was real enough. It bought Flint Sundberg, a Western guide with a wall of certificates and a long record of getting clients up the mountain and, far more importantly, back down it. It bought a Sirdar named Furba and a personal climbing Sherpa named Lakpa, both of whom had stood on this summit more times than Cheryl had ever slept in a tent. It bought the biggest, best-stocked private setup at base camp, a private weather service, and enough bottled oxygen to float a small expedition. What it could not buy was a body that adjusts to the death zone, weather that behaves, or the plain humility to turn around, and those, in the end, were the only things that were ever going to matter. That is the cruel arithmetic of the whole thing. That almost every line on her invoice was real and useful and worth the money, right up to the exact altitude where none of it was worth anything at all. Her guide had spent 20 years getting people up that mountain back and down alive, and I would trust a man like that over any check she could write. She had signed the truth herself, of course, in the part nobody ever reads. The waiver ran for pages, and she initialed every one of them fast and barely looking, on the assumption that paperwork was just the toll you pay on the way to getting what you want. In plain language, those pages said that climbing this high can kill you, that the death zone sits beyond the reach of any rescue, that no amount of support and no amount of money guarantees a summit or a safe way home, and that she was choosing every bit of it with her eyes wide open. She had put her own initials down beside every single warning that was about to come true, and she had done it without slowing down to read a word. Months later, those same pages would read like a prophecy she had personally signed off on, point by point. The acclimatization rotations were where it all started to come apart. On every trip up the mountain, Cheryl was slower than the schedule wanted, slower than she expected of herself, and the thin air did not care in the slightest about her training or her bank balance. She would arrive at a camp gray and sit through a hard night of pounding headaches and no appetite, and then frame the whole thing to herself and to everyone back home as just a rough patch on the way to an inevitable summit. Every time her body told her the plain truth, there was a heated tent and a warm meal and a fresh bottle of oxygen waiting to talk her back out of believing it. The mountain was giving her the same blunt feedback it gives everyone, that she was not ready, and she was the one person on the team absolutely determined not to hear it. Each rough rotation that ended back in comfort taught her the wrong lesson, that she could push through anything, when the truth was that she had simply not yet pushed into the place that does not let you come back. Acclimating cannot be rushed and it cannot be bought. Your body just needs time, and I wish she had heard that as the plain fact that it was. The real trouble began the moment the slow part started. Acclimatizing on Everest means weeks of climbing up and coming back down, over and over, letting the body adjust by inches to air that holds less and less oxygen, and it cannot be rushed, hurried, or bought your way out of. Cheryl hated it. She emailed the office asking whether, given everything she had paid, the schedule might be compressed, whether she truly needed every single rotation, whether there was a faster track for a client at her level of investment. She wrote about acclimatization as if it were a line item she could simply upgrade out of, and her guide kept explaining, as patiently as he could manage, that the one thing on the entire mountain her money could not touch was the inside of her own bloodstream. She treated his answer as a man being difficult rather than a man being right, and went back over his head to the office to ask the very same question again. It did not take Flint and Furba long to see what they were dealing with. They had both guided wealthy clients before, and they knew the difference between the ones who listened and the ones who believed their money had already settled the matter. Cheryl trusted the price she had paid more than she trusted the people standing in front of her. When Furba read the snow, or Flint read the sky, she would weigh their judgment against the forecast on her phone and against the simple fact that she had paid for success, and the math in her head always came out the same. They were polite, and she was polite, and underneath all of it they were quietly worried, in the specific way experienced guides get worried, the way you worry about someone who does not yet understand what they do not understand. They had watched clients exactly like her summit and clients exactly like her die, and in all their years the deciding factor had almost never been the size of the package. The guides could see exactly where this was heading, and I still cannot understand why she trusted the number on her invoice over the veterans right in front of her. There was an email she sent from base camp that the company would remember for a very long time. One of her rotations had gone badly. She had felt awful and slow and frightened high on the mountain, and instead of hearing that as the warning it plainly was, she sat down in her heated dome and wrote a complaint. She said the experience was not matching the price, that for $620,000 she had expected to feel strong and supported and squarely on track for the summit. And she asked, in so many words, what they intended to do about it. She was, in her own mind, a paying customer who had been promised a result and was not receiving it, sitting at the foot of Everest, filing a grievance against the mountain itself. The office answered her gently and carefully. The way you answer someone who has not yet realized that the thing they are angry at cannot be escalated to a manager. It was, in the end, the only complaint she would ever file that no one on Earth had the power to resolve. There was one rotation, high on the mountain, that should have stopped everything cold. Cheryl had gotten badly hypoxic at altitude, confused and weak and frightened in a way money cannot reach, and Flint and Lakpa had walked her down very carefully, watching her every step. For a few hours she had been truly frightened, had understood in her own body what the brochure had so smoothly papered over. Then she was back in her warm dome with food and oxygen and internet, and the fear shrank into a story about a bad day, a hiccup, a thing the staff really ought to have handled better. And that is the trap. Because altitude is the great equalizer, the one negotiation she had ever walked into where her usual leverage meant nothing at all. Above a certain height, the body simply begins to fail, and a fortune and a beginner breathe the exact same starving air. Her forecaster could tell her when the wind would drop, but no forecaster alive could tell the wind to drop, and that distinction was the whole story she refused to learn. When the summit window came near the end of May, Flint was uneasy about it for her specifically. The weather looked workable, but Cheryl was slow. She was tired, and she had been slow and tired the entire expedition. And a slow climber in the death zone is a climber running out of time before they even start. He talked to her plainly about the risk, about how late she tended to run, about turning around if the day got away from them. She heard a man being negative about a summit she had already bought and paid for. The window opened, and she insisted on taking it. And a guide can only refuse a determined client so many times before the choice becomes hers to make. Before the summit, she sent one last message out to everyone watching back home, and oddly, it was something that actually made me sad, despite her flaws. She told them the weather was perfect, that her team was the strongest on the whole mountain, that after all the waiting and all the cost, she was finally about to stand on the very top of the world, and that the next thing they would see from her would be the photo she had paid $620,000 to take. She signed off, saying she had never in her entire life been more ready for anything. It was the last message she would ever send, and every word of it was pure certainty. They moved up to the South Col, the high camp, at around 26,000 feet, already at the edge of where the body comes apart. The plan, the only safe plan, was a few hours of rest, and then a start in the deep cold late that evening, hours before midnight, so the team would reach the summit in the morning with a whole day left to get back down. Cheryl was slow getting ready, slow with her oxygen, slow into the cold, and they left well past midnight, far later than Flint wanted. From the first hour, he was doing the quiet arithmetic in his head, the climbing rate against the clock, against the bottles of gas, and he did not like a single number he was getting. He had seen this exact picture before, a client who had spent her way to the foot of the climb and had nothing left in the tank for the part that actually mattered. Leaving the last camp already slow and hours behind is, in my experience, one of the surest ways to get in real trouble up there. The climb above the South Col was where the whole purchase finally met the mountain. Cheryl was exhausted almost at once, slumped on the fixed rope, stopping again and again, while Lakpa stayed glued to her side and Flint watched the hours bleed away. They were among the last people still going up, long after the strong, fast climbers had tagged the top and started back down past them. More than one of those climbers looked at how slow and how late she was and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She had paid for the strongest team on the mountain and the best forecast in the valley, and none of it could make her move one single step faster than her own failing body would allow. By late morning, she was still below the summit, far behind where anyone climbing safely should have been. Every climber who passed her heading down was, in effect, a warning walking the other way, and she read not one of them. So Flint called it. Standing in the thin, freezing air, he told her as clearly as he could that it was over, that she was too slow and too late and too spent, that the summit was not worth what it would cost to keep going, and that the only thing that mattered now was turning around, while turning around could still save her. He had turned clients back from near the top before and kept them alive, and he was asking her to let him do it again. It was the most important thing anyone said to Cheryl on that mountain, and it came from the one person up there who could see exactly what was coming for her. He was not being difficult, and he was not covering himself. He was doing the one thing she had actually paid him for, which was to keep her alive. Arguing with your own guide that high up, just because you feel you are owed a summit, is something that just leaves me absolutely speechless. Like, what in the world are you thinking? Nonetheless, she was adamant she would not do it. Standing higher than she had ever been in her life, emptied out and barely able to think, she reached for the one argument that had always worked, and she reminded Flint what she had paid. She had not handed over $620,000, she told him in so many words, to be turned around a few hundred feet from the top. And against his judgment, against everything he knew, with a client who would not be moved, and a summit close enough to taste, they kept going up because the only thing harder than refusing her was leaving her alone up there to try it without them. Flint radioed down to base camp that she was climbing on against his call, then stayed beside her rather than abandon her. It is the decision that has killed more clients than any storm, the refusal to turn around, and all that money only made it easier for her to make. A poorer climber might have listened, if only because she had no receipt to wave, but Cheryl had a receipt, and she waved it. And she made it. Late in the day, far too late, Cheryl Vandervoort stood on the summit of Everest, the highest point on the planet, the box finally checked, the photo finally taken. For a few minutes up there in the wind, she had exactly the thing she had paid a fortune for. Then she turned to start down, the wind already rising and the afternoon already burning away, and the truth of where she was and how little she had left began to arrive all at once. Getting to the top is only ever the halfway point, and I really need people to understand that the way back down is what kills most of them. The descent is where Everest does most of its killing, and Cheryl had nothing left to descend on. Somewhere below the south summit, she began to slow, then to stumble, then to sink down into the snow, the way utterly spent climbers do when the body finally stops taking orders. The long, late day had burned through her oxygen far faster than the plan allowed, and somewhere up there the supply that had been sold to her as unlimited simply ran low and then ran dry, and without it, at that height, the cold and the thin air closed in fast. Lakpa and the others got her up, got her moving, half-carried her, coaxed a few more steps out of her. But a person who can no longer stand or think cannot be walked down the most dangerous ground on earth, no matter how badly everyone wants it. Up there, a body that has stopped is very nearly impossible to restart, and every person on that rope knew it, even as they refused to say it out loud. Running out of oxygen up there is a death sentence, and I knew the moment her day ran long that the word unlimited on her contract meant nothing. Her money had bought the largest private crew on the mountain, and now those same people faced the one choice no amount of money can buy a way out of: stay with her and die beside her, or go down and live. They cannot carry a collapsed adult down from that height. No one can. The ground is too steep and the air too thin, and their own bodies were failing by then as well. They stayed with her as long as staying was survivable, and then Flint and Lakpa and the rest were forced to leave her where she lay and climb down without her, carrying a weight that no paycheck on Earth could ever be worth. Once a climber goes down that high, no team on Earth can carry them out, and I have never once seen money change that for anybody. What followed was the long, helpless wait that everyone who has lost a client up high knows too well. There was no rescue to send, because there is no rescue from that height. No helicopter that flies into that cold and that altitude in the dark, and the place where Cheryl had stopped sat far above any line a machine could reach. The team came down to the South Col hollowed out, and the news worked its way down the mountain the way it always does, one radio call at a time. By the time the light came back, every person on Everest already understood what had happened in the night, and that all the money in the world had not bought her a single extra minute. Down at base camp, her heated dome still stood, the espresso machine still working, the internet still running, and none of it knew that the woman who had paid for all of it was never coming back. Cheryl Vandervoort never came down from the summit of Everest. She died high on the mountain that day, in the death zone she had been warned about in writing and had initialed past without reading, a few hundred feet below a summit she had refused to give up. The woman who had paid $620,000 for the safest possible version of the deadliest mountain on Earth was stopped by the one thing that has never, not once, accepted payment: an altitude where the human body simply quits, and where a fortune buys you exactly what it buys everyone else, which is nothing. Her body was never brought down. Like most of those who die up there, she remains on the mountain, somewhere on the route, and recovering her from that height was judged far too dangerous to attempt. Down below, the machinery of an Everest death turned the way it always does. The operator notifying the liaison officer and the Department of Tourism, the district authorities logging another name, the embassy in Kathmandu reaching a family that had last seen her flexing an espresso machine in a heated tent. What came home instead of Cheryl was the paper trail of it, the demanding emails, the proud posts, and the waiver with her initials sitting beside every warning that had come exactly true. It is easy to laugh at a woman who tried to buy her way up a mountain, but to me what matters is that up there, she died the same as everyone else does. It is the easiest thing in the world to make her a punchline. The rich woman who tried to buy a mountain and lost. But she was a real person who had clawed her way up from nothing, who trusted the one thing that had never failed her, and who made the oldest mistake on Everest. She believed she could purchase her way past the part where the mountain gets a say. The death zone did not know she was rich. It did not know she was anything. It treated her exactly as it treats the budget climber and the billionaire alike, with total indifference. And the only people who ever truly understood her odds were the ones she had decided she was paying to overrule. No amount of money on this blue planet is going to change the way you die, folks. Sorry. If you like this episode, go ahead and smash that like button, and what the heck? Go ahead and subscribe! Come on! We need subscribers! We'll see you next time.